The bolt hit Marin Solis in the left side, just below the ribs, and for one full second she did not feel it. She felt only the shove, like a heavy hand pressing her sideways. Then the training floor tilted. Then the sound arrived, a flat crack that belonged to a rifle 3 racks over, not the blank fire emitter she had been told to expect. 23 seconds. That was how long she stayed on her feet. 23 seconds of walking sideways, of pressing her palm against her side and feeling wet heat pour between her fingers, of watching the faces of 6 different species freeze in a ring around her. Then her knees folded. Then the floor was cold against her cheek. Then there was nothing. The Vale Coalition Academy sat on a station orbiting a dead star, a place chosen specifically because no species could claim it as home territory. 6 delegations sent their young here to train together. The Vale, the Keth, the Oruan, the Tessari, the Dren, and, for the first time in the Coalition's 400-year history, humans. Marin Solis was 24. She had been on the station for 11 weeks. 11 weeks of being stared at in corridors. 11 weeks of instructors pausing mid-sentence when she entered a room, as though they had forgotten humans could attend. 11 weeks of smiling and saying yes, instructor, and eating nutrient paste that tasted like warm copper while the Keth trainees ate raw meat in the mess hall, and the Tessari trainees photosynthesized under UV panels, and nobody offered her anything better. She had earned her place. Earth's admission to the Coalition had taken 9 years of negotiation. Marin was one of 40 humans selected from a pool of 2 million applicants. She had graduated top of her class at the Geneva Preparatory Academy. She had passed the physical, the psychological, the linguistic, and the ethical batteries. She was not supposed to be here as a symbol. She was supposed to be here as a soldier. The live fire exercise was a standard Tuesday drill. 12 trainees, 6 species, 2 squads, moving through a mock urban corridor on Deck 9. Blank fire emitters were mounted on the walls. The objective was suppression and cover movement. No live ammunition. The briefing had said it 4 times. Marin had checked her own emitter twice. She was crossing the second intersection when the shot came from behind and to the right. Not from the wall emitters. From a rifle. A real one, held by a figure in gray instructor fatigues whose face was hidden behind a tactical visor. The bolt was plasma cord, military grade. The kind that cauterized entry but shredded exit. It punched through her left side and exited in a spray that painted the white floor panels red. Marin did not scream. She later wished she had, because screaming would have been simpler than the silence. She walked. 4 steps. 5. Her hand pressed against the wound and came away slick. She looked at it. She looked at the other trainees. The Keth male, Vorin, had his mouth open. The Tessari pair had gone pale green, their fronds flat against their skulls. Nobody moved to help. Nobody moved at all. 18 seconds. 19. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. The overhead lights smeared into long white streaks. She felt her legs go distant, as though they belonged to someone standing in another room. 22. 23. She fell. The sound her body made against the floor was small. A soft thud. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a human body hitting composite tile, and then the slow spread of red beneath her like a second shadow. She lost consciousness hearing the Keth instructor shouting into a comm unit, and the words she caught before the dark took her were, containment protocol. Do not let the blood touch the ventilation grate. Not get a medic. Not save her. Containment protocol. Marin woke in a sealed room. No windows. 1 door, locked from the outside. A cot, a water dispenser, a waste unit. The walls were lined with sensor arrays she did not recognize, not medical monitors, but spectral analyzers, the kind used in materials science labs. Her side was bandaged. The wound had been closed, but poorly, as though whoever stitched her had been in a hurry or had never stitched a human before. The bandage was already soaking through. She pressed her fingers to it and felt the familiar, wet warmth. A speaker in the ceiling crackled. A voice, Commander Yael, the station's Vale overseer, told her she was in quarantine, that there had been an incident, that she should remain calm. that a medical team would visit within the hour. The medical team did not come within the hour. They came in 4 hours. 3 Oruan physicians in full hazard suits, faces behind gold-tinted visors. They did not speak to her. They drew blood from her arm, 6 vials, and left. No explanation. No comfort. The door sealed again. Through the speaker, over the next 2 days, Marin heard fragments. Arguments in Vale. Arguments in Keth. The word human repeated like a curse. The word weapon repeated like a prayer. On the 3rd day, a Tessari biologist named Orrin Voss came to her room without a hazard suit. He was old, his fronds gray and thinning, and he sat on the edge of the cot and looked at her with something that might have been pity. He told her the truth. 43 years ago, a coalition survey team had found a derelict structure on a moon in the outer drift. Inside, they found genetic material, not belonging to any known species. Encoded in the material was a sequence that matched no living genome in the coalition database, except in one small fragment, a match to Homo sapiens, a match to a species that had not yet achieved spaceflight, a species the coalition had not yet contacted. The precursor race, dead for 60,000 years, had seeded Earth's evolutionary line with a dormant code, a biological payload buried in junk DNA, waiting for a specific stress trigger to activate. The trigger was hemorrhagic shock, the kind of shock caused by a plasma bolt to the torso. Marin's blood, drawn in those 6 vials, had crystallized within minutes. Not clotted, crystallized, formed rigid, branching filaments that grew and interlocked, generating a faint electromagnetic pulse with each new node. The Oruan physicians had sealed the vials in a lead box and locked them in a vault, because the filaments, when they grew dense enough, disrupted every non-human biosensor on the station. Alarms had fired on 4 decks. 2 Keth trainees had suffered cardiac arrhythmia from proximity. The genome was not a disease. It was not a mutation. It was a designed event buried in human biology for 60 millennia, waiting for the day a human would bleed on coalition soil. Marin sat on the cot and stared at her bandaged side and said very quietly, "Who shot me?" Orrin Voss did not answer, but his silence was an answer. On the 5th day, Commander Yael came. She was tall, angular. Her veil skinned the deep blue of arterial blood, and she stood at the foot of the cot with her hands clasped behind her back. She told Marin the shooter was Instructor Grell, a Keth marksman acting under sealed orders from the Coalition Security Directorate. The orders had been issued 9 weeks before Marin's arrival. The directive was simple. Once the human trainee was acclimated, introduce a controlled traumatic wound and observe the genomic response. The academy was not a school. For Marin, it had been a laboratory from the first day. Marin asked what would happen to her now. Yael said the security directorate had voted 6-1. The majority position was termination. Marin's genome was a precursor weapon. It could not be allowed to propagate. She would be sedated, exsanguinated, and her remains incinerated. The one dissenting vote had been cast by the Tessari delegate, who argued for study over destruction. Yael said she had 48 hours. That night, Orrin Voss returned. He carried a maintenance toolkit and a stolen access card. He told Marin there was a shuttle bay on Deck 22, a maintenance shuttle with enough fuel to reach the drift station at Kale's Reach, where no coalition jurisdiction applied. He told her he had been studying the precursor genome for 30 years and believed it was not a weapon. He believed it was a message, a biological letter, written in the language of blood, waiting for a human to be in a room with other species to be read. He did not know what the message said, but he believed killing the messenger would be a mistake. He unlocked the door. Marin walked through the corridors of the academy in a stolen maintenance jumpsuit, her side aching, the bandage soaked through again. She passed the training floor where she had fallen. The floor panels had been replaced. The blood was gone. No one had marked the spot. She reached Deck 22. The shuttle was there, small and ugly and real. She climbed in. She keyed the ignition. Through the cockpit glass, she saw Orrin Voss standing at the far end of the bay, watching. He raised one thin hand. Not a wave. A salute, or a farewell. She could not tell. The shuttle detached. The station fell away behind her, a ring of lights against the dark. She flew for 6 hours. At Kale's Reach, a lawless port built into a hollowed asteroid, she docked and walked into a crowd of 100 species who did not know her name, who did not care about her blood, who would not lock her in a room and vote on whether she should live. She sat in a corner booth in a dockside bar and pressed her hand to her side. The wound was still bleeding. Slowly, steadily. She watched the blood seep between her fingers and thought, "This is the message. I am the message. And I am still here." The final image is Marin Solis, 24 years old, one human among thousands, bleeding quietly in a room full of strangers, alive by her own stubborn count. 23 seconds. She had lasted 23 seconds. She intended to last longer. Anna Kovic remembered the shot. She remembered the heat of it in her shoulder, the way her body jerked sideways, the way the masked instructor lowered the rifle and stepped back as though he had swatted a fly. She remembered counting. 1, 2, 3. The floor coming up. The smell of cordite and floor polish. 17, 18, 19. The sound of her own blood hitting tile. A soft patter like rain on a window. 23. Then the dark. Then she woke in a white room, and a woman in a gray suit smiled and said, "Good morning, Anna. How do you feel?" And Anna said, "I was shot." And the woman said, "No, dear. You fainted during a balance exercise. You've been asleep for 10 hours. And Anna looked down at her shoulder. No wound. No bandage. No blood. Smooth, unbroken skin, as though nothing had ever touched her. But she remembered. She remembered every second. The facility was called the Lindgren Center, though no sign outside bore the name. It sat in a valley in northern Norway, surrounded by birch forest and fog, accessible by a single road that washed out in winter. The nearest town was 40 kilometers away. The trainees called it the well, because the valley was so deep and narrow that the sun only reached the courtyard for 3 hours a day. Anna had been recruited from a private security firm in Zagreb. Headhunters. A contract. A number with too many zeros. She was 29, former military, no family to speak of. A good candidate. A clean candidate, they had said in the interview, and she had not asked what that meant. There were 14 trainees at the well. They trained in tactical movement, threat assessment, close quarters engagement, and what the instructors called stress inoculation. The training was brutal. Sleep deprivation, cold exposure, simulated drownings. Anna had done military training before. This was different. This was not building capability. This was mapping limits. Every exercise had a biometric harness strapped to the trainee's chest, recording heart rate, cortisol, neural activity. The instructors watched from behind glass. They took notes. They never smiled. The shooting happened on a Thursday. Live fire drill. The instructor wore a black tactical mask, no insignia. Anna was moving through a plywood corridor, weapon raised, when the shot came from a left. Not a blank. She felt the round enter, felt the bone chip, felt the heat bloom under her skin. 23 seconds. She counted them. She always counted. Then she woke in the white room, and the woman in the gray suit lied to her face. Anna did not confront the woman. She smiled. She nodded. She went to breakfast. She sat with the other trainees and ate oatmeal and listened to them talk about the afternoon's exercise. And she watched their faces for any sign of recognition. None. They had not seen the shooting, or they had seen it and chosen to forget, or they had never been in the corridor at all. That night, Anna did not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed and pressed her fingers to her left shoulder. The skin was smooth, but beneath it, deep in the muscle, she felt a stiffness, a ghost of damage. She pressed harder and winced. Something was there. Something the surface did not show. Over the next week, she watched. She counted. She mapped the facility's routines. Lights out at 2200. Guard rotation at the north gate every 90 minutes. Camera blind spot behind the laundry building, 6 seconds wide. She had been trained to observe. Now she observed the people training her. On the 9th day, she found the archive room. It was in the sublevel, behind a door that required a keycard she lifted from a sleeping instructor's coat. The room was cold, lined with metal filing cabinets and a single terminal. She searched by her own name. The file was thick. 17 entries. 17 dates, stretching back 4 months. Each entry described a session, a scenario, a wound location, a time to unconsciousness. Session 1, right thigh, 19 seconds. Session 2, left forearm, 14 seconds. Session 3, abdomen superficial, 31 seconds. Session 7, left shoulder, 23 seconds. 17 times. They had shot her 17 times. Each time, she lost consciousness. Each time, she woke in the white room with no wound and no memory. Or so they intended. But the memory stuck this time. Something was different. The ghost stiffness in her shoulder. A crack in their process. She kept reading. The file was not labeled training. It was labeled consciousness mapping. The objective, stated in plain language on the first page, was to document the architecture of human awareness during hemorrhagic shock, to record in precise neural detail what the brain did in the seconds between blood loss and unconsciousness, to build a model, to replicate the pattern. The buyer was listed by a code name, Oracle. The contract was for a complete neural map of the dying human mind, sufficient to construct a digital upload framework. They were not training soldiers. They were building a blueprint for copying a soul, and they were using her as the raw material. The other trainees were not trainees. They were observers, handlers. She had eaten breakfast with them for 4 months. They had watched her be shot 17 times and said nothing. Anna did not run. Running would trigger a response. The facility had protocols. She had seen them. She needed to walk out calm with what she carried before they noticed the keycard was gone. She copied the file to a drive. She put the drive in her boot. She walked back to her room. She slept. The next morning, she went to the courtyard for the daily briefing. The instructor, the same masked figure, she was certain, though she could not prove it, outlined the day's exercise. Stress inoculation, cold water immersion. Anna nodded. She counted the guards. 2 at the north gate. 1 in the watchtower. The camera blind spot behind the laundry. 6 seconds. At 1400, during the cold immersion exercise, Anna triggered her plan. She did not flee. She walked. She walked toward the laundry building at a steady pace, as though heading to the bathroom. She entered the blind spot. 6 seconds. She was through the gap in the fence before the camera swept back. The forest was cold. The birch trees were white and bare. She ran. Not fast. Steady. A military pace, conserving energy. The drive was in her boot. The file was in her head. She did not look back. She walked for 6 hours. She reached the road. A logging truck stopped for her. The driver did not ask questions. She rode in the cab in silence, watching the valley shrink in the side mirror, watching the well disappear into fog. At the train station in the nearest town, she sat on a bench and pulled up her sleeve. She pressed her fingers to her shoulder again. The stiffness was there. Beneath it, something else. A small, hard lump. She pressed harder and felt it shift. A fragment. A piece of the bullet they had never removed because they had never needed to remove it, because they had rebuilt her shoulder around it. She was the 23rd version, not the 23rd session, the 23rd body. She had seen it in the file, on the last page, the page she had almost missed. A diagram, a tank, a label, Kovic A, iteration 23. The woman in the gray suit had not lied about the wound. There was no wound, because the body was new, printed, grown, loaded with memories up to the moment of the last death. Anna sat on the bench in the train station and looked at her hands. They were her hands. They had always been her hands. Hadn't they? The train arrived. She boarded. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that she carried the file, the drive, the proof, and the small hard fragment of a bullet in her shoulder that did not belong to her, that belonged to a woman who had died 22 times before. The final image is Anna Kovic on a moving train, forehead pressed to cold glass, watching the Norwegian forest slide by, counting nothing. For the first time in 4 months, She was not counting seconds. She was simply riding. Alive. The 23rd. The last. The one who walked out. The bolt struck Ren in the chest, just left the sternum, and the sound it made was not a thud. It was a ring. A clear, high, metallic ring, like a hammer striking a bell. Cold iron. The one substance the Fae could not touch, could not forge, could not abide. And someone had loaded it into a hunting crossbow and fired it at a human girl during a ceremony they called a rite of passage. Ren fell. The marble floor of the Ashenhold caught her. The marble drank. That was the thing no one warned her about. The marble drank. Her blood hit the white stone and sank into it, absorbed, pulled down like water into dry earth. And the floor, which had been still for 800 years, shuddered. A crack appeared, thin as a hair, running from the spot where Ren lay outward in both directions, splitting the great hall from wall to wall. The Fae court went silent. Every immortal face turned toward the crack. And Ren, bleeding, counting her own heartbeats, felt the floor pull at her, felt the stone trying to drink her dry, and thought, they did not bring me here to train. They brought me here to feed. 23 seconds. That was how long she stayed conscious. 23 seconds of feeling the cold iron bolt in her chest, and the cold marble beneath her back, and the slow, greedy pull of the stone drinking her life. Then the dark. Then the Undercroft. Then the truth. The Ashenhold was a fortress older than human civilization. It stood on a cliff above a gray sea, in a land that existed in the fold between the human world and the Fae realm. No human could find it uninvited. No human could leave it unpermitted. The Treaty of Ash, signed 3,000 years ago between the first human kings and the Fae court, stipulated a tithe, every generation, for human children would be sent to the Ashenhold to serve as apprentices. They would train in the Fae arts. They would learn discipline, obedience, and service. In exchange, the Fae would not cross into the human lands. They would not take. They would not feed. Ren was 17 when she arrived. She had been chosen from a coastal village, the third of 4 children, the one no one would miss. The Fae emissary who collected her had been beautiful and cold and had not looked her in the eye. She was led through the fold, through a curtain of gray light, and into the Ashenhold, where the Fae court waited in the great hall and looked at her the way a farmer looks at a new tool. There were 3 other human trainees. Colm, 16, from a mountain town. Sable, 18, from a city in the south. Davin, 15, the youngest, who cried for the first 2 nights and then stopped, because crying drew the attention of the Fae wardens, and their attention was worse than silence. The training was strange. Not combat. Not craft. The Fae taught them stillness. They taught them to stand in one place for hours. They taught them to bleed, small cuts, controlled, offered into shallow bowls. They called it iron study. They said it built discipline. Ren did not believe them, but she stood still, and she bled into the bowls. And she watched the Fae instructors pour the blood into channels, cut into the floor, and murmur words she could not understand. The hunting rite was held on the winter solstice. For human trainees, for Fae lords, for crossbows. The Fae called it a test of courage. The humans walked a corridor while the Fae fired over their heads. Blanks, they said. Ceremonial. No one had ever been hit. Ren was hit. She woke in the dark. The bolt was gone. The wound was closed, but poorly, sealed with a Fae salve that burned and smelled of burnt sugar. She was lying on a stone table in a low-ceilinged room beneath the fortress. Candles guttered. The air was damp and tasted of salt and rust. A Fae sat beside her. Not a lord, not a warden, an outcast. His name was Kale, and his left ear had been cut off close to the skull, the Fae mark of exile. He had been pressing a cloth to her chest when she woke. The cloth was red. He told her the truth because he had no reason to lie. He had been cast out of the court for asking questions. Now he lived in the Undercroft among the roots of the fortress, and he watched the machinery below. The Ashenhold was not a fortress. It was a lock. Beneath it, in a cavern deeper than the sea, something slept. Something that predated the Fae, predated the treaty, predated the land itself. The Fae called it the Hollow King. It was not a king. It was a hunger. A vast, mindless hunger that had once consumed everything above the earth until the Fae, in their first age, had found a way to seal it. The seal required fuel. The fuel was blood, human blood, specifically, because human blood carried iron, and iron was the one element the Hollow King's prison could metabolize. The Treaty of Ash was not a peace agreement. It was a feeding schedule for children per generation, trained, acclimated, and then, on the solstice, bled. Not killed. Not immediately. Bled slowly, over years, in small cuts and controlled offerings, until the body could give no more. Then, the next generation arrived. The hunting rite was the final test. The bolt was meant to wound, not kill. A controlled bleed. A measured offering. The crack in the floor was not supposed to happen. But Ren's blood was wrong. Kale had tested it. She carried an iron sickness, a rare human condition where the blood held 3 times the normal iron content. To the Fae, her blood was poison. To the seal, it was acid. When it hit the marble, it did not feed the lock. It corroded it. The crack in the Great Hall was not a crack. It was the beginning of an opening. And through the opening, far below, something was stirring. The Fae court convened in emergency session. Ren, still weak, still bleeding through Kale's bandages, was dragged before them. The Lord of the Ash, a tall Fae with eyes like frozen ponds, pronounced the verdict. Ren would be bled dry, every drop, poured into the crack to seal it. A sacrifice, a final tithe. The other 3 human trainees would be returned to the human world, their memories stripped, the treaty renewed. Ren stood before the court and said nothing. She looked at Colm, at Sable, at Davin, and saw their faces. They knew. They had always known. The small cuts, the bowls, the channels in the floor. They had known what they were for. That night, Kale came to her cell. He carried a key and a plan. He could not stop the court. He was one exile against 1,000 immortals. But he could do something else. He could take her below, to the cavern, to the Hollow King. The Fae believed the Hollow King could not be killed. They had believed it for 3,000 years. They fed it because they feared it. But Kale had spent 2 centuries in the Undercroft, listening to the thing breathe, studying the seal, reading the old texts. He believed the seal did not contain the Hollow King. It sustained it. The blood feeding did not keep asleep. It kept it alive. Remove the food. Break the lock. Let the hunger starve. It was a gamble. If the Hollow King woke fully before it starved, it would consume everything. The Fae, the humans, the land, the sea, everything. Ren said yes. They went down. Colm, Sable, and Davin came with them. Kale led the way through tunnels cut into living rock, down past the Undercroft, past the root systems, past the water table, into a cavern so vast the ceiling was lost in darkness. The seal was there, a disk of white marble, 50 meters across, veined with channels that glowed faintly red. The channels were the bloodlines. 3,000 years of human blood, layered and compacted, holding the disk in place. Ren walked to the center of the disk. She knelt. She pulled the Fae salve from her chest wound and pressed her hand to the marble. Her blood, thick with iron, seeped into the stone. The disk groaned. The channels flickered. The crack from the great hall extended, spidering outward. The Lord of the Ash appeared at the cavern's edge with 100 Fae soldiers. He shouted. He commanded. He raised his hand to strike. Ren pressed both palms flat against the marble and pushed. Not with her hands. With her blood. With every drop of iron-rich life in her body, she fed it into the stone, not as fuel, but as acid. The channels hissed. The glow turned from red to black. The disk cracked, split, broke apart in a sound like the world ending. Below the disk, the Hollow King stirred. A vast, dark shape, formless, hungry. It rose toward the broken seal. The Fae soldiers screamed. The Lord of the Ash raised his hands in a warding gesture. But the Hollow King did not consume. It reached upward, opened its shapeless mouth, and found no blood, no iron, no food. 3,000 years of feeding, and now, for the first time, nothing. It reached. It grasped. It found only air. It shrank. It withered. It pulled inward on itself, like a flame without fuel. The vast dark shape folded, compressed, diminished. It tried to consume the stone, the air, the light. But it could not. It was not built for anything but blood. And there was no blood left to give. The Hollow King died. Not with a roar. Not with a battle. With a whisper. A slow, dry exhalation, like sand running out of a glass. And then it was gone. And the cavern was empty. And the silence was total. The Lord of the Ash stood at the edge of the broken seal and looked to the empty dark below and did not speak. His warding hands lowered. His face, for the first time in 3,000 years, held an expression Ren recognized. Fear. Not of the Hollow King. Of what came after. Of a world without the tithe. Of a world where humans were not food. Ren stood. Her legs shook. Blood ran down her arms, her chest, her neck. She was still bleeding. She would bleed for a while yet. But she was upright. She counted her own heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Still here. Colm caught her arm. Sable caught the other. Davin stood behind her, small and shaking, but present. Kale stood apart, his one good ear turned toward the empty dark, listening for a sound that would not come again. The final image is Ren, standing in the broken cavern, bleeding from a dozen wounds, surrounded by 3 other humans and 1 exiled Fae, looking up at the Lord of the Ash and the 100 soldiers who could not touch her, because the treaty was broken, because the tide was over, because the thing that justified it was gone. She walked out, up through the tunnels, up through the undercroft, up through the great hall, where the crack in the floor was wide and dark and led nowhere, out through the gates of the Ashenhold, into the gray light of the fold, into the human world. She did not look back. She did not need to. The count was over. The seconds belonged to her now. All of them. Every single one. End of document.